Hey guys, for today's video, we're going to be discussing the current meta changes that have been a result of the Grand Creators release, along with the uh, ban list. Protos and Imperial Order leaving the game is crazy good for the format, along with the removal of some Morg, which isn't as impactful as the other two, but is still very good. And then switch to 3 skill drain, and a few other cards that came back, like Snow, might disrupt the format a little bit. So today we'll be doing a discussion about that. Before we get started, I would like to note that there won't be feature matches this week between some personal issues that have arose and the amount of people that we had at the locals that I play at. It was very hard to record, so we just didn't record this week. The winner's deck profile also will not be recorded, mainly because it was me. I won again with the V-Trooper deck. The only change was Link Spider. I cut it for Halka Fibrax. But all that being said, we're going to go on and get into this. I'm going to show you the first deck in each of the columns, and then we will go from there and just fill out from there. I don't think this will be in a particular order except for the best decks and maybe tier 1, because there are so many just different things to cover. And just because you see your deck in the rogue tier does not mean that your deck is bad. It just means that it has less consistency or power than the other decks. You could play pretty much anything you want in this format. And if you find a way to make your deck work with the Adventurer engine, then it automatically gets like +1 point on the tier list. So, without further ado, let's go on and get into the best deck of the format. No shock. Deck won the Pro Play event down in Tampa. It won both the team event and it won both the solos event. Deck's kind of insane. The Adventurers are at worst level 3 extenders. Weird. And they are also, at best, an extra negate to protect the Scythe Lock. Also weird. Crazy how strong it is. Tier 1, we got the Prank Kid deck, also with Adventurers. It's a worse version of the Phantom Knight deck, but in a weird way. So Phantom Knight always requires 2 cards to play, whereas Prank Kids only needs 1. The issue is the Adventurers don't act as part of the ability to play. Like if you draw the Adventurers, they're just not level 3 extenders to get you to your Cherubini, for example. So because of that, they work less so together, but they still work together enough that they are played together. Tier 2, or sorry, Tier 1.5, I don't usually believe in 1.5s, but I feel like these are where like the decks that are almost there, but they're not quite at Tier 2. Like they've shown consistent results and they're got a lot of boon. Is B-Trooper. I'm a little biased to this, but B-Trooper is such a strong deck in this current format. There are so many ways to play it with just DPE or pure. There's an Inzector support, which is really good. But overall, I think B-Trooper is a solid tier 1.5 deck. It's almost there to be good enough to be considered a tier 1 deck. And it's very potent when played correctly and with the right person. So in tier 2, we got Baby Eldlich, as I like to call it. The 3 skill drains are insane, and this is one of the only decks that actually still gets to Imperial Order you, because you could play Secret Village. And Secret Village is pretty good backed up with skill drain. So easily tier 2. I could even see this going higher once the hype on Eldlich goes down a bit, because I do think this is slightly stronger than Eldlich in like the one-on-one, but I think that Eldlich has more of a broad spectrum to play against because of the power that the Golden Word brings to the game. And then down here at Rogue, our very first deck is going to be Thunder Dragons. A lot of popularity picked up with this because of Snow's unbanning. Snow is honestly just a natural fit for the deck. It totally makes sense for people to be wanting to play it again. I just still think it's just missing a little bit too much for it to be, and it's not just Colossus. I think that it's just missing some consistency and it's just missing some power behind it. So now for the rest of this list, we're just going to go from what we see from left to right. These are our placeholders and what I believe to be either the best or close to the best in the columns. I'm going to start with another tier 1 deck, which is the Invoked stuff, and I'm going to put the Shaddolls with here because they're basically the same thing. Deck's obviously insane. Don't need to really talk about it. You lost in the Deer, you lost to Fusion Destiny. 2 slaps on the wrist, big deal. It took 5 years for you to get a slap on the wrist. Other than that, deck's hyper consistent, and it gets to lean very hard into the Schism stuff now, which is very powerful. We got the Water Exceed deck down here in Rogue. It's too fair, if that makes sense. Like, it's only unfair when they make Crooked Cook. And when they establish that, it's very annoying, but at the same time, this current format, you kind of always prevent it from ever coming up. So because of that, I think it's down here in Rogue. The other best deck in the format, I believe these are the two best. There's argument for a third best, but we'll get into that in a minute. Swordsoul, the deck has switched completely to Halqifibrax with the banning of Protos and IO and limiting desires. The Deskbot Auroradon stuff is quite crazy for the deck. It lets you play first and second because you're going second just lets you have pops now. To start your plays is kind of crazy. Halqifibrax, in my opinion, was always the strongest way to play the deck, and now that's the only way to play the deck. So I think as we go on and we see more tuning to the deck, we'll see that it is most certainly the most powerful way to play it. Easily the second best deck in the room. We got Dino down here in Rogue. The matchups that they were already losing from, they lose from harder now because they either got more powerful because of adventurers being put into the deck, or they had good matchups with the adventurer stuff. So unfortunately, Dinos falls down here to Rogue. Same thing with Heroes. They did lose a Fusion Destiny. Sorry, they're down to 2, which is more detrimental to this deck than any other deck because that's one of their main starters. Sure, they got a hero that lives, but they don't need access to their heroes, if that makes sense. Like they don't need access to cards like Stratos or not Vion, the Vision heroes. They already had enough of that. What hurt was losing Fusion Destiny because that's just a piece that they can't efficiently dig for because they have no way to make Verte if they do certain lines. And if they do Verte, then they can't keep playing. And they're not really making Destroyer Phoenix, or at least trying to most of the time with that. So Rogue also down here is Adagnister. Very hard time against the adventure stuff. They're already soft to interruption, and when you pair interruption that's backed up by protection, it's just kind of unfair. They are completely reliant on the extra deck, and with the Scythe Lock of the Phantom Knights, it's just not going to be able to be there. So this is controversial because they just lost Ava, which is their big power play for ultimateness. But I solidly believe that this is a close enough to be a tier 1 deck still. We'll just have to see how the players adjust. It's already pretty logical just assume that it's Ida10 Turbo from now on. And you can still get a pretty fair amount of cards into your hand for Herald. You're just no longer playing Ultimateness, you're playing Perfection because you can play Prep and Pre-Prep now freely. You do lose a lot harder to Droll, but that's the sacrifices that you have to do now because you lost Ava. But I do think Drytron is a contender for Tier 1. And I think right now, while people are still exploring Adventurers and people are still exploring 3 skill drain in their decks, we're going to see this here, and it'll probably fall lower. It might even fall down to Rogue. Who knows? Maybe I'm just over-evaluating how strong Ida10 and Pre-Prep are, but we shall see. Up here in Tier 1, we got Eldlich. I always feel bad about saying a trap deck is Tier 1 because that heavily relies on them winning the die roll. When they win the die roll, is without a doubt insanely strong, but if they lose the die roll, they have to play catch up, and sometimes they just can't. Especially because most of them don't get to play as many hand traps, like they'll play just the impermanents, and that's not enough sometimes. So I feel weird putting a trap deck up here, but it's because of the diversity of it. We saw an Adventurer Destroyer Phoenix version and Tampa. We've seen Invoked pop up here and there. And we have 3 skill drains for the pure variant. Sky Prison is still an insanely powerful card. So we'll see how it goes. I could easily see this falling down here to 1.5 or 2. Floowandereeze, we weren't able to see how this is going to be impacted in this format because we don't have access to the quick play spell yet. And I think that changes almost everything. Without the quick play spell, we're going to put them here. It's just not strong enough to keep up. Even though M-Pen when statue is a disgusting powerful combo, it's not protected enough anymore. And as people move to playing Cosmics in the main deck to help deal with Phantom Knights for the Scythe Lock, it gets weaker because they could just shotgun the trap and they can't activate it anywhere but the main phase. So they can just get rid of it before you can use it. But when we get the spell, I can easily see this going up to Tier 1. But for now, until we have the results to see it or the information, we'll just put it here 1.5. Tri-Brigade falls here too. This is just pure Tri. They didn't lose anything, but they got Tiger. Um, I'm not sold that Tiger was really that bridge to make them all that, but they have what it takes to still be a tier 1 deck because Revolt is still powerful. It's a lot weaker nowadays, but it's still a good card. Gren Maju. So this is a hot take in tier 2. We lost 2 desires. That hurt. But there are ways to play without 2 desires. You could just go 40 cards. And you're still playing like this weird danger OTK style deck where you just rely less on Maju. You could play cards like Prosperity or Extravagance, and you just sacrifice some of the dangers, or you just play very hardcore into the dangers and allures, and you just try to dig to the pot of desires. You still have Orochi. You have 3 skill drain now, which is very popular, or very powerful, sorry. I do believe that it makes this much better. I'm putting Pendulums in tier 2. I don't think this is quite there yet. We still don't have Electromite. We still won't get Electromite, but we will get beyond the Pendulum in May. But I think Astrograph and Destrudo being back and Snow makes this deck very powerful. I think we're just waiting for Triff to really show us the light. And this is where I'm conflicted. It's Virtual World and where it belongs. So this is not pure Virtual World. This is the Brave variant. I need to be specific. If you're playing pure Virtual World, put yourself down here in tier 2. It just doesn't do enough and it's not protected. It's not able to protect itself. If you're playing the Braves, I think it's such a drastic jump in power that it could be considered one of the best decks in the format. And I will explain why. We don't need to talk about how Swordsoul's so good. It's the same deck minus Protos plus Crystron Halqifibrax for better interruption and better combos. And we don't need to talk about Phantom Knights. It's the same thing, but protection from Nibiru and other cards with the Adventurer monster, the Griffin. But where does that fall in line with Virtual World? Well, Virtual World also just loses to Nibiru if they don't get set up Crystal Link before 5. They can also just hard lose to a singular Ash. Now you get to do this and protect it with Griffin. Griffin makes it so you don't auto lose to a single card anymore, and they're level 3s, which is important. Because they're level 3s means that if you draw multiples or too many of them, you could summon it and still use level 3 tuners. You could trigger Nian to summon itself back and start your 6s. The Adventurers mold perfectly with Virtual World. It's almost kind of obscene. The deck still has inconsistency issues, but you just did get 3 E-Telly as well, which also is a boon of power. I think the Virtual World is easily up here, but at the same time, I'm so afraid to put it up here because of how cloggy it is. We also saw this at the event this weekend. The deck just shit on itself, literally, like, lack of a better word. It just couldn't play. But when it does play, it's debatably more powerful than Swordsoul, and it pretty much does what Phantom Knight does, but instead of Scythe locking, you're Caliga locking with protection, and that's just gross. It's tier 1, Sky Striker. This is, in my opinion, the best deck in this tier. You still have everything. You lost a Fusion Destiny. Slap on the wrist, you know. A lot of people are expecting Leading Engage or multi-roll or Hornet drones to go up, and I think they're all mad for that because this deck is crazy. But it's still crazy now. You don't get to use the Adventurer stuff. Maybe you could, but I highly doubt it because you don't want to clog your main monster zones. Destroyer already does that, but Destroyer at least removes itself a lot easier. So this deck is insane. And if you're not playing Destroyer, you know, kind of the same thing with Virtual World, if you're not willing to adjust to the necessary cards, then you need to bump down to tier 2. But, you know, if you just really don't like those cards, you don't want to play them, then don't play them. You don't have to. It's just your deck does take a big hit in power if you don't play these cards. But as I said before, you could play pretty much anything in this format in this list and be totally fine. Bird Up is in tier 2. This is the deck that got hit the hardest on the ban list, in my opinion. It lost Samorg, it lost Imperial Order, and it lost a Recital Starling. That's a lot of hits. I know Imperial Order isn't tied to the archetype, but pretty much every list was playing it in the mainer side. You still get to play Feathered Storm. You still have this crazy skip your opponent's turn trap in your deck somewhere in your mainer's side. Very powerful deck. should be on everybody's radar still. I think once people realize that the deck's not dead, it's just a lot more frail, then it'll be played a lot more. I can see it getting bumped up to around here, but for now we're going to keep it at tier 2. Dragon Link's down here too. The impending Dragon Apocalypse with Albaz is coming around the corner, and every month that we get closer, this deck gets worse. People are not wanting to play it because Albaz just hard counters it. And we also just aren't seeing it as much. It's a very big brain deck. Why play that when you could just play, Sky Striker, which is significantly easier, or Phantom Knights, which is significantly easier, and your boards are typically better. But Dragon has such a good grind game and is so powerful with the Shaddoll that I think that this could easily climb up. Maybe even up to one of the best decks. Maybe. Salamangreat. This is weird because Circle was not what the deck needed, but Circle was what we wanted. But then we lost two Cloud of Desires. It's conflicting. The deck is more consistent, which is great. It's build-a-board the deck. The build-a-boards aren't great, but they're usually backed with a double pop and or a negate, plus reoccurring Ash Blossoms, plus other hand traps. So usually this deck works just fine. I think this deck is very powerful. It definitely climbs up from Rogue just off of the Circle, and I think if we get the third Circle next list, and if we get a Gazelle maybe, then it could even climb up to 1.5. I don't think this will ever be a tier 1 deck now, because its combo always ends on the Mirror token. Lunalight. A friend of mine is trying to make me a believer that this is a tier 1 deck, and I'm going to be brutally honest, this is what I think of it. I think the Lunalight combo is very powerful. It's very hard to interrupt. It's not once per turn. Its own combo lets you reuse Tiger, but you've only got one of it, so you have to draw it. But you have a Searcher and Tenki, but you have to draw it. It's a little rough. You don't always get to do it, but when you do get to do it, it's powerful. It's most certainly better than the Rogue, but I can't see it anywhere past that. I think that if Konami's mad and they decide to give us extra copies of Tiger or Tenki back, and they correspondingly hit Tri-Brigade, then we could see the deck be a lot more powerful. The Warriors States, I think it's just a tier 2 deck. Not saying that's bad, but I don't think it's it. And then the final tier 2 deck we got Live Twin. Not much to say. Didn't really change. Didn't lose anything. Didn't gain anything. Doesn't play the adventure stuff that I've seen. It's just kind of there. I don't think it's Rogue because it's very powerful and what it wants to do, and it gets to do what it wants to do very often, and it gets to play a million hand traps with Crossout Designator to protect itself. It's very moldable as well, so I definitely don't think it's bad, but I definitely think it belongs to tier 2. So yeah, this is the tier list. This is all subjective. We're very fresh into this format. Lots of room for improvement. Lots of room for adjustment. I don't think that anything is solved quite yet except for the best decks. I do believe that Phantom Knight and Swordsoul will stay up here and not move. And I think that Virtual World is probably going to sit up here once people fine-tune it more, because we still have Small World. Something that I didn't even talk about when I was talking about it. We have Small World now. Very powerful card. And it's going to be great. You'll notice that there's no Grand Creators archetypes on here, like the Inzectors, Punk, or Exorcister. For Inzectors, I think they're a casual rogue deck, fun to play. And I'm already going to play that because 2012 me loved Inzectors. I don't think Punk or Exorcisters are there yet. I think they need their new support to really push, and there's not enough data on them to see. But yeah, that's the tier list. I really think this is as solid as we're going to see for a while. We have the YCS Vegas remote duel to look at, along with some more Pro Play Tour events. And we could revisit this down the road when we get more information. But until then, let me know what you guys think. Do you think this tier list is close, accurate? Do you think that I'm horribly misjudging Lunalight, or I'm overly appraising Swordsoul? Let me know in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.